Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. 3 analytics pros and the occasional guest discussing digital analytics issues of the day. Find them on Facebook at facebook.com/analytics hour. And now, the Digital Analytics Power Hour.
Welcome, everyone, to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 10. Tonight we're going to try something a little bit experimental in that we have a guest on the show, but that guest is a document, and we're going to talk about it. So we're discussing tonight the Fuqua Business School CMO survey that's published twice a year in August and February. And so tonight we're tearing apart the February 2015 results. I am always joined by my 2 co-hosts, Tim Wilson and Jim Cain.
We're in the same room, but that does not mean we're in the same body. But thanks for the attempt there.
I think it was right to make me the husband in this relationship.
Tim and Jim Wilson. So
we're in the same room, but we're not in Indiana. So we can go in this couple-way manner and freely get served.
In another podcast first, we've got Jim and Tim in the same room. Guys, how you doing tonight?
Great.
Fantastic.
Awesome. All right. So let's dig into this thing. So this is a survey that I've been reading for a few years. I always love to see it come out. I feel like it helps us understand better what's going on in the mind of a CMO. Just to give people a little bit of background, you can actually find this survey at cmosurvey.org, and it's run by the Duke Fuqua School of Business. Christine Moorman is the director of the CMO survey, and she's also a professor at the Fuqua School of Business. So we're going to talk about this. So first, let me throw it out to you guys. What really popped out in this survey to you? And maybe as we talk about it, we can break down the structure for folks as they're listening.
So there were a couple of things that jumped out that were, I would probably say, surprising yet depressing. Maybe the higher level one, and obviously, most interested in the marketing analytics piece. And part of what the survey does is breaks down how the marketing spend and the allocation of budget to different activities is expected to change over the coming 3 to 5 years. And for the percent of marketing budget spent on marketing analytics, the current levels overall for the surveyed companies, it's at 6.4%, and it's saying in the next 3 years, the mean is their expectation is that it's going to go to 11.7%. So, okay, great.
That's good, right? That's increased investment in analytics.
Right, and you say that's great, but then I contrast it with a couple of slides in the results later is asking the question, you're like, hey, you recognize you must be getting a lot of value out of analytics because you're deciding you should do more of it. And they ask the question, to what degree does the use of marketing analytics contribute to your company's performance? And a 1 was not at all, and a 7 was very highly. And as of February, when they did the survey, marketing analytics got a 3.2. So it was below the middle of the road, and that's actually the lowest that it's been since they do it like every 6 months, and that's the lowest score that it's ever gotten. It's been as high as 3.9. And so that has me looking at it saying, well, you could read that as saying at a macro level, they're thinking that we're not getting enough value out of marketing analytics because we're not investing enough in marketing analytics. But the one other wrinkle from the survey here was that they said that less than a third, actually they said 29% of projects use marketing analytics that are available or requested. And trying to square those, it feels real to me. It feels like, hey, there's more stuff to spend money on. We've got vendors coming with DMPs and optimization platforms and tag management systems. We've got ways we can spend more money. But the fact is, it sounds like you've got stuff in place now. You've got data available now that you're not using. I'm skeptical that there are people saying, oh, we're going to nearly double our staff so we've got capacity. It seems like it's kind of representing what I would think is kind of a skewed perception of what it takes. We're not getting a lot of value out of marketing analytics. We're not trying to. A third of the time, or 2/3 of the time, we're not even trying to use the data that's available, and yet we're thinking that we're going to grow our investment, and somehow magically we're now going to get more value. So it's kind of depressing.
What I think is an interesting counterpoint is at the beginning of the deck, when it talks about the economy at the beginning, and most CMOs feel bullish about the economy for the first time since the beginning of the recession. And then you see that they're not measuring anything. I almost wonder if that's like senior marketing decision makers are going, there's less accountability, there's more budget, the market is better. We don't need to measure everything as rigorously as maybe we need to.
I guess there's a certain part of me that could agree with that assessment. Certainly when we went into the recession, one of the things I certainly noticed was companies were looking for ways to get more value out of current investments and trying to leverage analytics in meaningful ways to do that kind of stuff. But it fights me a little bit, though, the fact that as they do this survey, we're going to make this big growth in investment, and yet we're trending downward in terms of where we're using it and how effective we think it is. I look at this survey and I view it what I'm seeing there, and Tim, maybe you do too, and I love, Jim, the contrast you're putting on it too, because I want us to think about it from every angle. But it's almost like we're seeing an existential threat to what we do as analysts. We've got an opportunity to become pivotal to what business is and what marketing is, especially in the context of digital. And are we missing our opportunity to actually engage and become strategically connected?
Sounds great because I'm from a consulting company, but the thing that I found was interesting also is that I say interesting a lot.
I find that fascinating.
I literally find that interesting.
They're spending more money on measurement. They just find it less valuable and they're using it less.
Right, which I think I'm trying to understand how the existential threat, maybe it's just too fancy of a word.
Well, what I mean by that is that eventually they'll start realizing, why are we spending money on something we don't use?
But it seems like it is inconceivable that the use of analytics will decrease, right? Like there's no, I can't envision a future where we just punch the button and go back to the Mad Men era and it's all on gut. I think maybe the threat is that the analyst becomes the next CMO. Well, that was actually, I didn't have this in my notes, but I think it actually had like the average tenure of marketing leadership was much longer than the 27 months that usually gets tossed around. But is it possible, like we've talked in the past about how the analysts have a very short tenure because another opportunity comes along. There's something else they can jump on, and it's up to the analyst to, by choice, leave and move on to something else because there's a demand gap. Is it possible that what will hit is that there will be this churn of frustration with the analytics leadership that the CMO and the CEO and the CIO will be looking at what's being delivered, and they'll say, we're not getting value, we're spending a crap ton of money, and the revolving door will shift from the CMO to an elevated analytics position. That is not a well-baked thought at all. That occurred to me while we were discussing this.
But I think
it was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And, to a certain extent, I'm very displeased that neither of you are buying into my Chicken Little theory here. Why can't we have an existential threat once in a while?
But what's the envisioned future where that's
and so no, I agree with you that it's not that analytics will go away. We'll all start drinking in the office and being sexist again.
That was a Mad Men reference.
Yeah, that was a Mad Men reference.
It's not always how you do business in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
here in the South.
But
or is it possible? Is it possible that analytics instead could go down the path of being? I mean, this will be the pot shot at banner ads and display media. That limited evidence that it's super effective, but people have gotten so used into carving off a big chunk of their budget for it that they just keep doing it, and they're like, we have to be churning out reports.
Don't you feel like display is getting a rebirth because of the advent of really great retargeting and DMP usage?
Did you say really great?
That is another topic.
Other usage? I won't qualify the usage. Just say it could be used effectively. I don't know. Like, I feel like there's renewed interest in display. Anyways, that is a totally other topic.
I think so too, but there's probably also renewed interest in phrenology, and I know people who wear magnets on their wrists to help with arthritis and shit.
You do have a weird shaped skull, Jim.
So
But I want to go back to we're going to spend more, we're using it less.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
They plan to spend more than they're spending today, but the reality on the ground is they use it less in key decision making. The point being, though, is that it's not growing at the same pace that we plan to grow spending.
Right. There's not
And
an
so-
indication that we're finding it more valuable, so we're investing more.
And actually, we're only looking at the top line report here, but there is a breakout by industry. And you can see in a somewhat kind of like this makes a lot of sense kind of way, business to consumer product companies are at 46.9%, right? Whereas at B2B product companies or B2B service companies are at 23.3, which makes a ton of sense.
And with those percentages, to clarify, you're saying that's the percentage of projects using available or requested marketing analytics.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I had the same B2C product it lends itself to
Right. I'm in
analytics.
retail.
Yeah.
Use marketing analytics and digital analytics to help me understand customer behavior.
We talked before, was it the last episode we did where we like in defense of the hippo? With that in mind, is that disconnect showing up in this data? Like CMOs are like, I'm spending money on it. I don't think we're doing anything with it. I don't have access to the analysts.
That actually might nail it. Like that may be the persona. If you were going to put a slide up and say that's what it is. All I can do is spend money on it. That's the easiest thing. Not that it's easy to carve out money from somewhere else. I'm committing to spending more, yet I'm doing that partly because I'm frustrated that we're not getting more use out of it. But I don't know that CMOs are recognizing that disconnect. That would be
CMOs, what do they know, right?
Well, nothing from their analysts, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of what I mean. Like, I want to talk to the CMO, right? If I'm an analyst in a company, the CMO and I should be friends. We should be working together. And if I'm not talking the CMO's language, he and I or she and I we're not going to hang out, right? So we don't say the
Friends
same
off.
things or think the same things. Well, let's jump to another section. So what else did you guys see? What else was interesting that we can talk about?
That one was kind of a wow. If you look at these and you compare them, you kind of scratch your head and say this doesn't feel good. The one that is probably more mind blowing is that 13.2% was the percent of the respondents have been able to quantify the impact of social media. No big surprise. It's tough. It's tough to quantify the impact of social media. Now 41.8% said that they have a qualitative sense that it's working for them. So they're looking around, they've got anecdotal evidence, that's how I'm interpreting that yeah, we think this social is a good thing. But 45% haven't yet been able to show the impact of social media at all. So, okay, yet the expectation is that the growth in spend on social is expected to go from 9.9% of their budgets to 22.4% of their budgets over the next 5 years. So they're saying
That's
half of
mind-boggling.
the respondents are saying we can't actually quantify the impact of what we're doing on social. We can't measure it effectively, and yet we're going to more than double how much we're spending on it. And that kind of has me scratching my head, whether that is because they assume the measurement will catch up. Measurement's always lagging the actual channel, history has shown. Or is it that they're just saying they've kind of thrown their hands up and said, that's where my consumers are. I've got to do it, and I'm okay flying blind. I'm okay making this the equivalent of television in the 1970s.
But I went through that whole section of slides, and in my head I just pictured like a chapter title called Bullshit, It's Delicious. What does social media do? I don't know. But we need to use an agency, and we need to triple our budget.
Do you want to be where your consumers are? Yes. Do we have data that says consumers are in social? Yes. Okay, that means you need to be in social. Like there's kind of a if X then Y. The challenge is that you have no ability to tune that in any way, and you can waste a ton of money on social if you don't have any way to compare different efforts, different activities. And I question whether there is any sense of, yes, we have a plan to do that. We have a plan to move those percentages.
Yeah, what I'd like to know is who are these 13% of companies who have quantitatively proven the impact of social? I'm fascinated by that. Like, there's a lot we could learn from those companies. And
But
how do we grow that? Or are those just the disillusioned CMOs who think they're doing that, and they should be over in the 45% who haven't been able to show the impact yet?
or they, and maybe the breakout by industry or detail would show, or are they just uniquely in an area where
Right.
it's easier? There is a rationale for having a direct response social call, and therefore it's a simpler world of saying, yes, we can quantify that we generated X dollars of revenue as direct click-throughs from
Right. Because
social.
we built a product that lives inside of Facebook or something.
Yeah. Our entire, I mean, I don't know that, and there's that extreme. There's also ones that say, yeah, we're a low cost seller of something, and people just follow us for deals. But yeah, that's a good point. It would be great to try to understand.
Yeah,
If you've
and I
cracked
always
that nut.
see, like, in my mind when I see kind of the lay of this, I always think about the Gartner hype cycle. Like, we're now at this peak of whatever that peak is called. You guys know what I'm talking about?
The what? The Gartner what?
Hype cycle?
Oh yeah, the Gartner.
Gartner hype cycle, yeah. And so in a certain sense, like we were talking about analytics before, maybe we're in the trough of disillusionment, right, around that. And right now social is really kind of at this really high expectation. Like I believe in this, and we just think it's going to create so much value for us as a company. We're going to put a ton more money into it, even though we haven't been able to prove out quantitatively what it's doing for us as a business.
The trough of disillusionment?
Yeah, that's a Gartner. That's a.
It sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons special weapon.
Oh, I
Yes.
wouldn't know anything about that, but
It's
I
plus
totally would.
5 to
So that's, I was actually talking to somebody today because a few years ago I sort of had a minor epiphany, and I called it the frustration gap, but now I kind of don't want to map it to the Gartner hype cycle, where we know that there is much more data out there, and so our expectation is now that we haven't been able to tie our spend on these marketing channels directly to the end result. We now have massive more amounts of data. Our assumption is that with more data, we now have the ability to tie from a tweet all the way to a purchase, or from a TV view, or from an ad view, or from a banner ad. And so more data becomes available. We actually can measure more and get more visibility, much more than we could 10 years ago. But the expectation has kind of shot past that. And so when you're asking a question of, are you measuring this effectively, you're getting low scores because the expectation is inflated rather than because you're truly under delivering. Like if the expectations come down, then on a 7-point scale, you're going to get a higher rating. Is that possible?
I just rolled a die 20 and killed you with my trough of disillusionment.
but I just had the plateau of enlightenment and just had a saving throw.
Wow.
Consultants are awesome.
Especially the analytics kind. So here's another thing I thought was really interesting to me. If you look over on slide 43 of the document, it's talking about using...
For listeners who are following along while driving in the car, we do not recommend that you look at slide 43 right now with us.
People read in the car all the time. It's just a fact of life now.
I'm in the car right now.
Yeah. No, but it's talking about using online customer behavioral data and how you expect to use it in the future and things like that. And it's really interesting because everybody thinks they're going to use more of that. And so this just validates kind of what we're already seeing, which is right now is a great time to be a DMP, right? Moving data from a behavioral collection platform over to places where I can use it for marketing purposes, whether that be site-side optimization or media segmentation or anything like that. There's a big future in that. So that's, you're looking for new business ideas.
An investment. So So two things. One, Jim and I are in the same room because we're at the same conference. So I wound up having dinner last night with they're not a DMP, but they are kind of a customer behavioral cross-channel data collection platform. And it was interesting watching one of their customers ask them, start throwing out other companies that were kind of in a similar space. And the vendor had not heard of like half of them. So I think that may be, it's another area, you know, we've talked about the MarTech, you know, technology landscape before, that there's just this explosion of companies and there's an explosion of investment, and it's slides like these that say, or it's results like these that say 92.3% of CMOs are going to increase their use of customer behavior data. Well, guess what? You see a number like that and you say, I'm going to start a company like that, or if I'm a VC, I'm going to invest in a company like that. Whether or not that actually bears out remains to be seen. But you contrast that with the question about concerns about privacy, and they're like, not really.
Yeah, nobody is concerned about privacy as much as you would think. Yeah, that was interesting.
The thing that I wonder about these, I mean, I always think of the X+1 write-up in Wall Street Journal that made everybody freak out a few years ago.
Can you give the Cole's notes on the X+1?
Hey, Canada reference.
We're in the same room. I'm trying to be civil.
Michael, do you remember this one? There was like a Wall Street Journal article from 3 years ago or something.
Hold on, I'm accessing my deep brain.
You mean you're Googling it?
No.
So
I don't know what you're talking about.
It was a big credit card one, and they used X+1 where they tied together your web data, offline data, cooperative data, and they would show you a credit card product designed specifically for who they think you are, and their accuracy level was like through the roof.
Okay.
And so then the rest of the article was like a detailed breakdown on why aren't there checks and balances? Do you realize these kinds of things are possible? And it blew my mind. I didn't, because we don't do stuff like that. I don't know if CMOs are buying technology that necessarily does this, but they're being sold it. I think if you asked this same question and you said, in ways like this, your average CMO would come back and be like, hell no, that's creepy, but we're doing this part. Like, we're doing a small subset of what that means.
Well, but I mean, the question, and this was slide 44 in that Highlights and Insights deck, was how worried are you that the use of online customer data could raise questions about privacy? So it's just the use of it could raise questions, right? Not even like you'll get burned or it's an ethical issue or it could damage your business. It's just like that it could raise questions. And it was, again, a 7-point scale, 7 being very worried, 1 being not at all worried. And if you do the math, it's something, you know, well over 50%, close to 60% were 3 or below.
Yeah, but online customer data to most people and to most practitioners is visits, traffic source. Like, you don't think you can do anything creepy with it until you realize that what this question actually means is we can mash it up with your customer file. We can mash it up with one of these data cooperatives. You can do unbelievably 1984 stuff. And I think, again, when you ask this question with the word online in it, a CMO is going to go, no, what do I care?
Because they're thinking aggregate web analytics, and we're going to use that as opposed to the slope from the slippery slope from there to retargeting to really building out a cross-channel, customer record is a slippery one. I mean, I remember seeing some of the academic exercises where they said we've gone to see how much stuff can we find out about. It's a way that doesn't scale, but they can say, hey, it's crazy how much we can. I mean, I do think that's, again, a whole other episode. This is just generating potential future episodes, but the privacy concerns, one, there's a delta between when one company proves out something is theoretically possible, and that can get spun as, oh my God, companies can do this tomorrow, whereas the reality is companies have trouble getting their base web analytics page tag consistently deployed on all pages on their site. So it's a theoretical but not as real risk.
But still, you have to say that it's probably an existential threat to.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. I mean, privacy probably is a whole other.
Well, right, because like, what would this chart look like if we asked CMOs in the EU, right? I bet it would have a whole other complexion. But it's one of those things that, again, it's a combination of like most companies don't have some sort of evil plan to like get at you with all this data. They're just not that competent, to be frank. But on the flip side, that lack of foresight of how are we going to use this data could quickly take a company in a direction that they could come to regret. Just because they did it blindly and then suddenly end up with an outcome of, hey, we've got a really useful thing that also is just doing something with our customers' information that is awkward and potentially not a good thing.
Right. So that's the sort of the cognitive dissonance of, and Jim, I think you kind of hit it earlier, where if you say, I'm thinking of it as a marketer and this mass of a pool of people that we can collect stuff and market to more effectively, and then if you actually pivot it and say, okay, that means here's what, if you were one of our consumers, we would be doing X, Y, and Z, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, or not you, for your 13-year-old daughter, this is what that means. And then like all of a sudden they're creeped out. And I don't know that is being, we're hungry for saying, we want to know, we want to segment down, we want to personalize, we want to make things relevant. It's like, well, to really make stuff relevant, you really have to have a lot of information, which means you're going to have that information. And if that was you, would you be, creeped out?
Yeah. So there's one more slide I want to jump to really quick, and then I think we should probably start to wrap things up here. But there was another slide that I thought was interesting in the analytics section. It's slide 65, and it's talking about, does your company formally evaluate the quality of your marketing analytics? And I thought that was really interesting from a data governance perspective. And of course, the vast majority don't, right, do anything to evaluate how good of a quality is the analytics data or the analytics that we're doing. And I thought that was really interesting too. Any quick comments on that?
I think it's interesting that it says marketing analytics and not digital analytics.
Yeah, probably because it's all encompassing.
Those numbers would be way lower.
You think there'd be a smaller percentage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When I read that, and I am not a survey writer, I'm not a methodology person, because I read it almost as the value delivered, but I think you're right. That's actually more a data quality question, and it does go to probably the reality. And to Jim's point, if marketing analytics includes my customer database, that's probably have a little more of a runway to get customer data in place. And web analytics, because so much of the data is not tied to a specific customer record, is kind of just like organizationally, it's often still sort of living off in a silo. That kind of says if you don't, then you must not have a formal data governance plan, because isn't that one of the tenets of governance is actually ongoing evaluation of data quality?
Yeah, or at least maintenance of that quality, which means you're evaluating it in some capacity. Anyway, I think that's really interesting. I would love a follow-up question to this about, do you intend to formally evaluate if you answered no? Because that would be an interesting thing to see if it was an emerging area of concern. So, if anyone from, the CMO survey at Fuqua School of Business is listening, that's a freebie.
From Helbling to you.
Yes, we should be so fortunate. Anyway, let me throw it back out. Let's wrap up. What are some of the big picture takeaways for you guys out of this?
I mean, to me, I think it's pretty brief. I think there is some cognitive dissonance going on. I read these and say these don't. Almost everything that we hit on, that we're going to invest more in social, yet we're not measuring it effectively. We're going to invest more in marketing analytics, yet we're not using it, what's available to us now, and we're not seeing it as super valuable. If I were a CMO reviewing this and I noted those, I'd be like looking in the mirror saying, wait a minute, what is my plan? Because my guess is they're answering a lot of these questions without really thinking through what is their roadmap to get to a point where those answers make sense. That, they should be looking at that and saying, I better come up with a plan to square this. If I'm going to be investing more in social, I better figure out what I'm going to do. I have to either set my expectations and be really clear, come up with some sort of plan where I can kind of rationalize why I'm doing this. And my instincts are that that's not actually happening, that it's just kind of a little bit more of a wish and a prayer than this is a formal roadmap that I can rationalize. That's it. That was as short as I get.
You're like, I'm going to be brief, and then I fell asleep like halfway through. I agree with most of the things that you said, Tim, except that The real standout to me is, again, this disconnect in terms of I'm willing to spend a lot more, and not just on social, but on people who don't work for me to do our social. And I'm spending a little bit more on measurement, but I'm not really deriving value or really taking advantage of it. I think social is like a thing, it's like a pair of shoes, and measurement is like your heartbeat. It's like your vital signs. It's not something that people can easily bring in from outside, and it definitely highlights that CMOs aren't winning, or what's that, the Tom Davenport book, competing on analytics.
Competing on analytics, yeah.
Most CMOs are not competing on analytics, because I wonder if they had answered all the measurement questions oppositely, if all of the social they would have been down in the other direction.
Oh, interesting. If they had said, we're measuring the heck out of it and we're going to be reducing our investment. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're like, everything we do, we measure it, and I understand those numbers. And by the way, I eat a lot of bullshit. We're not going to buy any more social media.
Yeah. Oh, when's the last time you heard Groupon mentioned as a darling, right?
Fastest company to $1 billion.
No, a lot of cool things, but they're not where they used to be. And it's because people were using data to realize, hey, we're not getting a lot out of this investment.
What about your takeaways there, Mr. Helbling?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I'm such a big fan of this survey is it gives this great perspective from a totally different angle on the stuff that we do as digital analytics people and marketing analytics people. And it's great to see someone else's point of view and try to interpret kind of what that means to us, and and how we should do something differently or not differently based on that. And it's fascinating. And as much as maybe I want it to be an alarmist or existential threat or whatever, my key takeaway is that probably it's not as huge a threat as I might have come in thinking, but it's really profound. I love looking at it every 6 months and just sort of.
So Jim Cain is an existential threat?
Yeah, well, he's from Canada.
That's the name I used to wrestle under.
Existential threat. So that's my big takeaway, is this is a great way to see another point of view or another facet of our awesome industry. So, hey, if you're a CMO and are participating in this survey, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to be a CMO someday, we'd love to hear your opinion as well. We highly recommend you download this report and take a look at it. I think there's some really great information for you and your organization.
To be fair, if you're an analyst and actually have different takeaways, which is a lot more realistic, we'd love to hear from you too.
Couldn't an analyst aspire to be a CMO?
When you tweet about the podcast, use #existential threat.
Hashtag, yeah. That will be fun to track. We don't track social.
Measure it. It's going to happen.
That's right. We don't have any quantitative impact of social going on here. Who's our CMO? Anyway, so again, hey, thanks for listening. We love the opportunity to hear from you. Of course, there's a couple ways you can do that on our Facebook page at facebook.com/analyticshour, and on Twitter @analyticshour. And of course, you can find us on the Measure Slack group. So check that out if you haven't. Again, for Tim and Jim Wilson. No.
Oh, now. Okay, fine.
We've been betrothed during the course of this. Yeah. He's going to tell our wives.
Wilson Cain. No. For Tim Wilson. And Jim.
Cain Wilson sounds like something you'd like to do.
Hey, I would vote for that ticket in 2016. That's all I'm saying. Now, of course, I think, Tim, you would have to be president, given that Jim is not an American.
He'd be kind of the Julie Louis-Dreyfus kind of Veep, right?
Yeah, my people have the right to arm bears.
And bear arms.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for listening. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.
See you next time.
Later.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. We welcome your comments and questions. Facebook.com/analyticshour or @analyticshour on Twitter.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.